Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I am back with some more Esoterica. Today we are beginning our exploration in earnest of Hiram Butler's The Goal of Life. It struck me because of the word Melchizedek, and we've talked about that in the introduction. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various topics that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everybody, but some people seem to find enjoyment in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we discuss the goal of life. But before we begin, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there are several playlists linked in the corner above and in the box down below, along with their source material so that you can get a better, clearer understanding of why I say the things that I do. A particular note will more than likely be the Unconventional Bible Study and the Infinite Integrations playlist. Those both should come to bear as we go along. We're going to dive in and begin with The Goal of Life, or Science and Revelation, Chapter 1, Development. The beginnings of organized life act from instinct without brain power to define and guide the impulse. The insect moves about apparently without aim, a little way in one direction and back, then in another. Universal life runs in accordance with its form and quality, as the water runs the water wheel. But as experience is gathered from hunger, meeting enemies, and the general struggle for existence, brain powers begin to develop. And with the developing of the brain, the general nervous structure develops and refines. In this way, the universal mind takes of the elements of the earth and organizes for itself a body, through which to find expression, through which to carry forward a line of growth towards the fullness of manhood. In its early history, the race was largely dominated by the instincts, because it was without sufficient brain power to correctly define the mental impulses from the cause side. It was not until a comparatively advanced stage of racial progress that the higher light of intuition appeared. Because mind always turns towards its source, consciousness towards its origin, man has always been a religious being. But before the reasoning faculties were sufficiently developed to have an intelligent recognition of the impulses of the universal mind, his religion was as immature as his mentality, and he worshipped the sun, moon, and stars, and images of his own ideals. During this period, the intellect was slowly unfolding, and as an aid to its growth, revelation, in the external types and shadows of its manifestation, was given to the people as they could receive it, for it was in this form that the earlier revelations came to the race. It is a law that thought suggested to the mind, though not understood, much less comprehended, builds itself into the organism, so that when the building is complete, the meaning of the thought is grasped. Therefore, revelation came first in types and shadows, the external form of the vital energy that was within. Added revelation was given as fast as the race developed sufficiently to receive it, but the vital reality was always represented by some material symbol. In the effort to interpret the revelation, gross errors crept in. In addition to this, there were other fruitful sources of error. Being largely under the control of the instincts, the people were exceedingly superstitious. Every manifestation of the incomprehensible, the grand, or the sublime, was to them always through the direct intervention of some unseen being. Thus, in addition to the nature forces, a multiplicity of gods took form in the popular mind, and the pantheons of the different nations came into existence. Again, the inclination of the human mind to seek cause readily developed into a search for magic power. There is, and always has been in the human will, a power entirely incomprehensible, a fact which led to the earlier nations into ceremonial magic, the black arts, and all the equipments of a religious and superstitious mind. But the coming of the Christ to earth lifted the race above this dark cloud of superstition, for it is universally admitted that the Christian religion lies at the foundation of the height and glory of our civilization. And here we are going to stop and talk about the fact that I do not believe that to be true. Christianity has been a calming force in some cases, but it has been an extremely destructive force in others. I'm not talking about the Crusades, because that was a response, right? The Islamic invasion of the European continent led to the Crusades. That was the reclaiming of lands that were generationally someone else's. It took several hundred years. There were 4 major crusades, I believe, and none of them were entirely successful. I'm talking about the Inquisition. I'm talking about the Roman persecution of the Germanic tribes. I'm talking about the overcoming of the Celts and the Druids. I'm talking about Christianity when they came to North America and eradicated the cultures that existed here. When they went to South America and they did the same thing. Christianity has been a civilizing force, but it has also been a quite destructive and blatantly evil force in the history of man. I know that probably set some people off. I have a tendency to step on toes, but if you go back to the Bible study, you will see that the God of Israel is not a God to serve. He is a petty, trite, easily deceived God. He is a God that will only reward you if you are bathing yourself in blood, in either metaphorical or literal physical sense. And so therefore I have ample reason to find complete disagreement with that. What Christ did, Jesus himself, in my estimation, was to try to get rid of that. And then came Paul, who was absolutely another destructive force in what God intended. Paul was completely at odds with all the rest of the apostles. Everybody that studied at the feet of Jesus was in opposition to Paul in large part, and yet the New Testament is made up primarily of Paul's testaments, his letters to the various churches, and the things that he thought was fine. It had absolutely nothing to do with anything that Jesus taught, but yet regardless, it is still held up as the example from which to live. Paul was not divinely inspired in my estimation. He was, in fact, a corrupting influence, and part of the reason why the control systems are so dominant is because of Paul. So in both Judaism and in Christianity, I find severe exceptions. Anytime that a blood sacrifice is required, it is being done for an entity who is feeding off of the negative energies of life. I believe fully in the entities. I probably differ here from that. The black magic, I don't deal with that. Ceremonial magic, I don't deal with that. I deal with prayer, fasting, and meditation. I take it straight to the source himself. Everything that I do, everything that I say, every action that I take is directed at God. It is not directed at any of the intermediaries. It is not directed at any of the control systems. And while that is going to be too much for some people, if it is too much for you, this is not going to be the place for you. You are more than welcome to be elsewhere. This is going to be the tone and the tenor of what we do here, right? I'm here to teach you magic. I am here to teach you how to do the things that God himself has said that you can do, right? The things that Jesus himself told you you could do, and then Paul said no. That is the things that I am here for. I am here to show you the things that are hidden from you. And in many cases, while I am doing that, I am going to step all over your toes. I tell you to bring steel-toe boots quite often for a reason. It's because the things that you believe are not necessarily true. The things that I believed were not necessarily true. And I have 161 videos where we went through almost the entirety of the Bible and discussed in extensive detail the various reasons why I hold this. Nevertheless, as the records of the past show, that there was an apparently darkened mental condition of the world at the time of the revelation of our Bible. And because the mind of the day is turned almost exclusively towards scientific investigation of the laws of nature, those mental states that led the race into the light of revelation seem crude and repulsive. The present trend of the mentality is to turn altogether from intuition and to depend wholly upon the reasoning brain. That's, again, not necessarily, that's not what I am doing, right? I use reason. I do. I use logic quite extensively. We talk a lot about the why behind every single thing that I do. Every single thing that I tell you, I can logically defend. And so that is definitely a part of it, but there are parts of it that are purely experiential. There is no way that I can give you my experience, but I can relay that experience to you. I can help you to find that own experience for yourself through prayer, fasting, and meditation, through direct devotion to the Lord God Almighty, who created anything and everything that you can possibly think of. A study of the record of racial experience during the centuries of the past, especially of the nations immediately allied to our own, and the present scientific investigation of a most materialistic character, complete the education given in our colleges and to our clergy. Ever is held up that frightful effigy of the darkened mind of the past as a warning against credulity and superstition. This effigy has intensified a materialistic mentality and has caused the educated classes to fear, even to admit to their own souls the possibility of revelation, or the active principle of intuition. They have practically shut out everything that savors in the slightest degree of a manifestation of the spiritual activity, and consequently, spiritual inspiration and added revelation are no longer possible. Not true. The terms inspiration and revelation have been misapplied, and therefore need definition. Inspiration bears to revelation the relation of cause and effect. Inspiration is not necessarily the act of a human agent becoming a medium of expression for a being in the spirit world, but it is a well-known phenomenon of everyday life. The act of recalling a thought we call recollection. That is, we have an experience and have forgotten it. A suggestion comes to our mind of something concerning this experience and we wish to recall it. The mind is at once concentrated upon the desired thought. Every other thought intruding itself is repelled, and the mind, held in the attitude of desiring, reaching out for one definite thought, draws in, inspires, the refined substance generated in the body and expressed through the brain at the time of the experience. This wonderful formative principle, active in all growth throughout the world, has its highest manifestation in the brain of the man, and the subtle elements generated in the body by past experience of thinking are called again into the brain, recollected, and they are remembered. Every part of the occurrence is put together again, member to member, and the experience in all its original form and power stands out before the consciousness which recognizes that which is past. In like manner, when the heart is sad from a sense of something to be known which is not known, the same faculty is called into activity and reaches out into the realm of the universal mind to gather that which is desired. The sadness of heart produces a negative state in the inner consciousness and intensifies desire. Under such circumstances, the individual gathers from the unknown and otherwise unknowable the knowledge of which the soul feels the need. The knowledge, thus inspired when formed in the mind, becoming a vivid realization, is a phase of revelation. Still another form of revelation is that received when God sees that a man needs knowledge of something of importance to himself or the race. Been there. Under such circumstances, the inner attitude obtaining in the mind, angels from the world of souls are frequently sent to him with messages of truth and wisdom. But in order to receive the message, the man, as the great teacher said, must become as a little child. He must realize that he does not know and earnestly desire to know. Because of this fact, revelation from the spirit world is always preceded by a condition which breaks down the selfish mentality and produces in the individual an earnest, childlike desire to know and to do right. This destroys, for the time being, all preconceived ideas, enabling the mind to be receptive and to listen. Then, the messenger who is sent from on high, all unknown to the individual, draws near and unites his mentality with the mentality of the one to whom he is sent, thus causing him to know even as the messenger knows. Therefore, in place of a command from a controlling mind, a loving unity is formed for the time, and the man is treated as a friend of God. But fear of every kind, even fear of error, fear of what people may say, an undue appreciation of one's own mental capacity, a disposition to criticize anything that may not agree with preconceived ideas, everything not in accordance with the thought of the messenger, tends to repel him and to reject his message. The education of the present day is such that even the most devout and earnest are afraid to receive revelation from God, and therefore the door is practically closed between God in the spirit world and man in the material world. There are barriers set up against everything except physical experience, and consequently, new and added revelation of spiritual truth cannot be received. Not only is the trained mind barred in every direction except in the direction of physical experience, but even here it must specialize. That is, restrict itself to a particular line of a very limited department of investigation. Thus, the person atrophies by disuse of faculty of even the external mind, except those necessary to the very narrow line of activities to which he is confined. To those familiar with the faculties of our great universities, the effect of this most absolute sacrifice of the individual to the cause of popular education is very evident. The broader intellectual interests are closed to its members, and except in the department of their own work, they are to a decided degree mentally incapacitated. One can look into their faces and almost tell the line of specialization each has chosen. That is true. Our education system is a great failure in many ways. Right? The narrowing of thought has hindered us in a lot of different ways. I can talk about that in the 12,000 year disaster cycle. You should check that out. Not only do our leading educators, but the majority of the men who lead in the research of time sacrifice themselves to the advancement of science. But it is well known that if a man is to attain marked success in any direction, he must focalize his whole mind upon that subject. Results are reached in this way that can be obtained in no other. The Cyclopean eye figures the reality of life referred to by our Lord when he said, "If thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light." Matthew 6:22. For purposes of concentration upon one subject, the physical eyes and the eyes of the mind become one. Physically, upon the book before you; mentally, upon the thought under consideration. And when concentration is upon material things, the eye sees nothing else. The Cyclopean eye of today has its development in the specialization of the intellectual world. Therefore, the education of modern times, conforming the mind as it does to its present channels, is in itself necessary and good, notwithstanding the fact that it narrows the range of the intellectual vision. The phenomena of mind, before referred to, is the inspiration that takes place when the entire attention is focalized upon one subject to the exclusion of every other. But in order to obtain this condition of concentration, it is necessary to repel, with a combative attitude, every thought but the one sought. In our educational institutions, we find this necessary repulsion carried to an extreme of an intolerance which condemns and rules out the higher faculties of the human mind, the faculties that lie at the very root, the foundation of consciousness, and with them is excluded the spirit of devotion or recognition of God. The accepted training of the mind is good in that it teaches the use of the perceptive faculties, to formulate orderly thought in regard to observable facts of physical nature, and gives control of the external mentality. But, sad to say, the present methods array the entire consciousness against God, the Spirit, and destroy the ability to reason from cause and effect, training the mind to reason exclusively from effect to cause, while, strange contradiction, cause is at the same time ignored. Some of our able men have noted the fact that it takes but a year or two in our theological institutions to eradicate the habit of a religious devotion, and in its place to imbue the mind with the spirit of infidelity. Infidelity to one's own highest attributes of mind and soul, consciousness, and infidelity in regard to the validity of Bible revelation. It is an interesting, unreported fact, right? And I say that it is speculative. Not everybody makes it through theology school, right? Not everybody goes to seminary and graduates. You want to know why? It is because through honest, earnest searching through that book, you will find direct, distinct contradictions, things that are absolutely antithetical to the very things that are purported. We'll take Solomon for an example because a lot of people who deal in esoterica like to deal with Solomon, and Solomon was not a good dude. The God of Israel specifically denied to the kings of Israel when they appear that they were not allowed to go back to Egypt to purchase either horses or chariots, and yet that is the primary source of money for Solomon. He was an arms dealer. He dealt in chariots and horses from Egypt that he sold to the various peoples around. He was in direct contradiction to the direct command of God. That's infidelity, right? That's what we're talking about. Religious devotion can blind you to literal facts. That is true. But people have religious devotion to their scientific endeavors. There are people out there that will tell you that there's no such thing as the chakras, and that I know to be simply untrue. That's not in my mind. I know that. You don't have to believe that. I'm here to tell you things, not to convince you of things. The people who fail out of theology, out of theological schools, out of the seminaries or whatever they call it in the other religions, that is why most of them fall out. It is because they cannot reconcile the apologetics necessary to go forth and to deceive people with the gospel. But a lot of them do make it, though. Look at Copeland. It is the course of, if this is the course of instruction given by religious teachers, is it surprising that the religion of Christ is at such a low ebb in the world today? The vital thought currents of the race are despised, condemned, and repelled, and only those faculties recognized which have unfolded through the struggle of animal existence from its lowest form up to the present, highly developed animal part of human nature. Then we are asked, if the things of which we are about to write are true, why have they not been known before? The reason is obvious in the fact that we, as civilized nations, have been working so diligently to close the door to all approaches from the cause side. These conditions have grown out of fear, perhaps justifiable fear, for in the absence of a mind that has surveyed the whole road and is capable of grasping the problem of life and putting in order before the people the broader outlines of truth, the great scheme of growth and development, the prevailing materialistic intolerance which has been the protection against the grossest superstition and error. Under existing circumstances, the best thing possible has been done. Throughout can be traced the general plan of the creative mind that formed the world and man upon it. It is a well-known fact that man can do but one piece of work at a time. Therefore, the Creator, or if you please, the creative forces working in the growth of the different races and different periods in the world's history, develop first a consciousness of the unseen and caused world. You can do more than one thing at a time. And you can walk and chew gum. You can walk and meditate. You can walk and pray. You can walk and do whatever. That's two different things. Keeping yourself moving in the correct direction safely without falling into traffic or whatever other hazards may be on the road. You can do that and contemplate the mysteries of life. You can do that and outline a book. You can do that and dictate to someone else on the phone. You can do more than one thing at a time. That doesn't mean that you're going to do multiple things well all the time, right? If you're trying to do two completely separate things at the same time, you're probably going to fail at one of them. But it is possible to do this and that at the same time sometimes. Therefore, the Creator, or, if you please, the creative forces working in the growth of the different races in different periods in the world's history, developed first a consciousness in the unseen and cause world. But, as we have said, the incapacity of the brain correctly to interpret causation made it necessary to take the race into the external activities and round out to completeness the capacities of the gray matter in its relation to the physical world. These capacities have been developed, and does not the time, the stage of development, the need of the people, cause the crying demand of the day for other and higher revelation? A demand that we go back, pick up, and carry forward that faculty of instinct that lies at the very foundation of our being, that we take hold upon it by the matured brain power, and develop in the race the intuitional power that will enable man to become more like his Creator, with a right hand to grasp the material working universe and its workings, and a left hand to grasp the spiritual forces and laws of causation, and thus blend his spiritual nature into a well-rounded and complete manhood. Now, I talk about the left-hand path a good bit, and that is a wee bit different than the one that you're probably used to hearing about. I have had direct revelation. I have a greater understanding than some people in things. I have been inducted into the order of Melchizedek, and part of that was that I get these downloads, these flashes of insight, these direct revelations that come to me, and one of those was about the auras and how they work. You have 7 distinct energetic electromagnetic centers, plexuses, within your body. The base is at the bottom, and it goes up in order. From base, it goes sacral, solar plexus, heart, throat, third eye, crown, and then there is an 8th one, which is the external divine one. These move in certain patterns, right? They are small. They're about the size of your fist, all excluding the last one. About the size of your fist. They can be a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller. It depends on you and your health. But they rotate. The one on the base, it rotates in a clockwise manner. As you staring forward, it is moving clockwise for you, right? If somebody else was looking at you, it would be moving counterclockwise, but for you, it is moving in the clockwise direction of your body. The next one up, the sacral, is moving left. It moves in a counterclockwise. If you have ever worked on a car, there is a thing called a serpentine belt. It's a good way to visualize what I'm talking about here. If there was a belt running around each of these chakras, what happens is it forces this one to move in a clockwise manner, and it forces the next one to move in a counterclockwise manner, and the one above it in a clockwise manner, all the way up. So you have clockwise, counterclockwise being base and sacral, and then clockwise will be your solar plexus, and counterclockwise your heart. Clockwise your throat, counterclockwise your third eye, and clockwise the crown. Counterclockwise the divine. Everything that moves in the counterclockwise direction is left-handed. It moves to the left-hand side, and there is a reason why it is differentiated. The top and the bottom are for about receiving energy. There are 2 sources of energy. One is bottom, right? It is feminine, it is receptive, it is generative. It is the nurturing like when you're growing a child, right? It is the part that nurtures it and creates it and makes it bigger. And then it is signified by black. The one at the top is penetrative. It is masculine. It is the destructive and creative force. It is signified by white. And you are supposed to move these up and down through the various chakras. It takes the form of the serpentine belt. When you're pulling from the bottom, you're using the darker grounding energies, and when you're pulling from the top, you're using the creative energetic energies, right? You're moving the energy from there to the ground, much in the way that electricity moves, because electromagnetism. The left-handed part, well, the top and the bottom receive the energy. They move in clockwise manner. The third eye and the sacral are what you use to create manifestation in your life. Those are the 2 points by which you feed the energy and give it the intentionality. The next 2 points is your sacral and your throat, and these are amplification points by which the intentions that you set are amplified and fed into your heart, which is the unifying force. It moves in the left, and it is for generating, once again, your intentions into reality, along with your divine chakra. You take the energies, you move them through you, and you set the intention, the amplification, and the intention for the growth and the manifestation. That is using the left-handed path, right? The left-handed path is the setting of intentions. The right-handed path is for the amplifications thereof. So my left hand and their left hand's a little bit different, right? Other people use it for sorcery, and while that is a little bit correct, it is not correct in full. It is definitely not tied to dark magic. It is not tied to ceremonial magic. It is not tied to dealing with the entities in their various forms and incarnations. It is about you directing your energy into the manifestation in the way that God intends that to happen. Now, this right here was just a level of responsibility talk. You are responsible for the knowledge that you just learned. Refer back to the Infinite Integrations playlist for more explanation on these things. Also, before you do any of that, please watch the 8 laws of creation and at least the beginnings of the Infinite Integration playlist. That is to keep you from being harmed. You can harm yourself by pulling the energy in the wrong ways. You can be harmed by setting your intentions wrong. If you are not focused, absolutely correct, the things that you do will be returned to you times 3 at a minimum. It is very important that you pay attention to the 8 laws of creation, 3rd time I mentioned that, and the Infinite Integrations playlist, the 3rd time I mentioned that. We're going to go ahead and jump into chapter 2, which was probably where we're going to wrap it up. I try to keep these around an hour if you're new. We try to keep these around an hour so people don't get too much overwhelming, right? So, chapter 2, the existence of higher faculties. And this probably got a lot to do with what we just talked about. Man, in his developing, has become overbalanced in the direction of the reasoning faculties. That's the right-handed path. And as suggested in the preceding chapter, the harmony of a well-rounded maturity demands that the intuitional faculties be understood and given their full function. As intelligent thinking beings, we find ourselves here with but a vague idea of how we came to be here, or of what forces projected us into being, and with less idea of the origin of conscious intelligence. I have talked about this again quite extensively, right? We are here for the experience. There is a whole process of generation. We existed prior to incarnation. We will exist after incarnation. But the point of being here is to be here. It is to learn. It is to grow. It is to take in the lessons for the divine spark which is within you and makes your decisions. In order to obtain a knowledge of such truths, we must have an adequate conception of the immensity of the universe and its eternal duration, and a realization that we are integral parts of the universe, integral parts of something we have discerned faintly, and vaguely defined as law, nature. In the dark ages of human intelligence, when it was illuminated only from its source, this something about which so little is known was called God, a term which expressed the idea of power only, almighty, all-comprehensive power. From this very early phase of human experience have come 2 modes of thought and action. The reasoning mentality of the intuitional mind had their beginnings in this period. That intuitional mind has been termed the subjective mind, and in the religious cults of the past and present, it has been mystically known as the mind of the soul. and the inquiry as to what the soul is has brought out many answers, uncertain and unsatisfactory to the mind analytic and its tendencies. The nearest approach to a satisfactory definition is that it is the thinking part of man's nature, which is as far from satisfactory as it is inadequate as a definition. If we accept the Bible revelation that God created the world and all that is in it by a word, then we must accept as a fact that we were created by that word. This, at least, suggests the thought that we are but a part of the universal mind, having been organized and given limitations that we term the individual consciousness. These limitations may be called the ego, and that which is limited, the soul. For illustration, if we take an airtight vessel and seal it up so that no air can get in or out, then the air originally in the vessel will remain, no matter where the vessel may be carried, even though it is forced into the depths of the ocean. It is so with the original consciousness of man's existence. It is part of the all-mind, and through organization, it has been shut in and given limitations, the control systems. And these limitations are determined by the uses arising in the necessity for maintenance of its individualized existence. This fact makes it evident that the stronger the ego, the narrower are the limitations of the individual. It follows, therefore, that in developing and in the expanding of the individual, there need be an overcoming of self-love and the eradication of too much self-appreciation, in order that the consciousness may become receptive to the fountains from which it draws its existence. We agree, therefore, in the assertion that individuality, as such, is an organized condition of life, and we agree also that the belief that life did not originate with us, nor with our ancestors. This being true and life being the source of our consciousness, the possibility of opening up the limitations of the ego is again suggested to the mind, thus giving free access to the inflow of the universal life. We're going to pause real quick and talk about the Trinity. All right, we did in the intro, and I'm going to do it again. But I believe in God, unequivocally, God the Creator, who is all. He is me, He is you, He is the space between me and you, and the space between me and you. He is everything you can put your hands on, and everything that you cannot. He is every single breath and every single thought that has ever existed in the eternity of everything. He is all of the planets and the stars. He is the space in between the planets and the stars. God is everything. And because God is everything, He can't experience or He can't understand things, right? There is no grief if there is no death. Right? For us, death is a very real thing. We experience people dying all of the time. But for God, that is just a returning of the eternal soul to the eternal being. We are individualized pieces of God, fragmented. And each one of us is given our own individual body, right? This is ours. We get to do with it what we please. You can tattoo it, you can inebriate it, you can destroy it. You can do with this meat suit what you want. You make that decision as an individualized piece of God. The part that makes the decisions, the soul, is an individualized piece of God. And when you die, you return to God. What we are here for is to experience this mortal incarnation. Because God can experience grief, He experiences it through us. Because He doesn't He doesn't experience, it's not that He doesn't understand, right? It's just that you don't feel it if it is not a real, right? The return to God is no reason for grief for Him. It is for us. We miss the person. So we feel the grief. And through us, God feels the grief. That is the purpose of your life. Sometimes those lessons that we learn, we're all here to learn lessons. Those lessons are beautiful, wonderful things. You can find the love of your life and live for 80 years together and have a wonderful, happy existence. That's probably not how it is exactly going to go down, though. You're going to have bumps along the way. You're going to have great pain in your life. You're going to feel enormous sorrow, heart-wrenching, soul-breaking sorrow. And you're meant to embrace that. You're meant to experience that so that your soul can learn, can grow. The lesson of grief is a major one. The lesson of overcoming grief is a much more major one. If you've known somebody who lost a child, many of them never get over it. In any real way, they live dedicated to the death of that child. It happened to my grandmother. It happened to various members of my family. Their children die and they spend the rest of their life stuck in that moment. They are failing the test. Yes, you are supposed to grieve. You're supposed to feel sorrow, but you're not meant to linger there. You're meant to overcome it, just as you're meant to overcome all the rest of the challenges in your life. Now, part of this theory that I have here is that before we were here, right, you're eternal. This little piece of you, that's an eternal part, and it's going to return to God. But before it got here, it was somewheres. This is what started me on my journey, where was the soul before? And so I read various books, and one of those was Soul Contracts, and it was a good one because it was foundational for what I do, and I have received through revelation the things that I have read about. Now, you can say that that is subjective, and that is perfectly fine. You don't have to believe me. I personally believe that we were all somewheres prior to being here, and that when we were there, we all came to an agreement. Some people are here to teach you happy lessons, and some people are here to teach you sad lessons, but every person that you have ever met, ever in your life, are meant to teach you something. Some of them are great lessons, some of them are bad lessons, but it's to teach you something. And you agreed to it before you came here, even the sad ones. If you are a parent who has experienced the loss of your child, you agreed to that before you incarnated. But you don't remember that. It is part of the existence that you don't remember the contracts. But you can find out what they were. There are repeating patterns in your life just as well as there are in mine. And whatever those repeating patterns are, that is where your lessons lie. You ever notice that if you didn't learn a lesson, the next time you get it, it's a little bit harder? That is part of the process as well. It is to reinforce to you that you're supposed to learn this lesson. Now, the method by which this happens, in my estimation, is the third part of the Trinity. That is the Holy Spirit, or the becoming, or the being, or time in movement, however you want to agree to it, right? The Spirit is the part that makes it happen. Your body, or your mind, your soul, makes the decision to move your fingers. But you don't move your fingers. The Spirit does. You make the decision, and then the energy within you, the Spirit, the divine spark of God that allows things to happen, moves your fingers for you. Your spirit is the part that takes your air and distributes the various nutrients to your body. It is the part that changes your food into the fuel that you actually use. It is the part that makes your heart beat. It is the part that makes you breathe. You can, in some small measure, take control of that, and that is what we talk about in main here. The intentional manipulation of the electromagnetic forces of creation. The Holy Spirit. You have access to that. You can take control of the becoming in the small way. Don't try it in a large way. It will reflect upon you and it will be bad. But if you are in accordance with the 8 laws of creation and you are living your life with God, then you have access to these things in a positive manner, and you can manipulate that energy to do wonderful things. I have healed myself through that. It is God. It is the Holy Spirit. Absolutely. But I could have chosen not to follow his path, and I could have chosen to stay broken. Instead, I chose to follow God's path. And because of that, I have access to these powers. And because I have access to these powers, I have been able to use them in a very real way to effect physical change within my body. Again, you don't have to believe that, but it is a truth. It's not often I call things truth, right? I don't stand on a whole lot, but what I did, that I stand on. I know that that was God working through me, but that it was my decision to heal. It was my decision to move the energy. It was my decision to do the things. And I think that's going to take care of that part. Like, I see Jesus of Nazareth coming up, and I wanted to touch on all of that before we got to there. So, special methods bearing directly upon this subject characterize all the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. Now, I don't disagree with that statement, but we will see how it is expounded upon, right? I believe that Jesus came here to tell you the exact same thing I'm doing in a different way, right? He wasn't talking about chakras. He was talking about the Holy Spirit. It's the same thing, right? It is the movement of the energy that allowed him to heal people at distance. It was that allowed him to break the bread into many pieces and to make the fishes extend to enough. That I fully believe. I believe that the teachings of Jesus were corrupted by the control system. That he told you all of these things I can do, and all these things that I can do, you can do and more. If you have faith but the size of a mustard seed, you can say to that mountain, be gone, and cast it into the sea. You can do those things. And then the church told you, well, what happened was dispensation took that away. Like, you could do it when he was here, but you can't do it now. Well, I'm telling you, you can now. And you don't need to call upon Jesus' name to do that. You can do that directly through God. I can say that because I've done it. And it is not evil. It is not something that you should be burned for or tied to a chair and thrown in the river. You can do this. It takes prayer, fasting, meditation. It takes dedication to the cause of God. It takes understanding his nature and his will. But you can do it. Nevertheless, the experiences of the past and of many persons in the present time demonstrate the fact that this letting go of the strength of the ego and being passive to the inflow of universal life have been destructive to the individuality. Life, notable among such instances is the spiritualistic medium who becomes passive and receptive to whatever may flow in. That can be dangerous. As a matter of fact, there flows into such a person just what he or she believes. You create your reality in a very real way. And as these people believe in the existence of spirits, disincarnate souls, therefore individualities or thought forms, dark and malicious characteristics of their own lower natures, flow in and possess them. And, as Christ said, the last state of these people is worse than the first. I am here to tell you another thing that is an absolute truth, and you don't have to believe it. There are entities. There are forces of light and dark. There are forces of good and evil. Good and evil are absolute polarities. There does exist absolute evil. There does exist absolute good, but your chances of seeing either one of those two absolutes is vanishingly small. I have stood in the presence of evil. I walked on the dark side of life for many years. Check out the origin stories. And so I can talk about that. I have seen people that did malicious things simply for the fact that they enjoyed doing malicious things. I have seen people who were dedicated to the destruction of everything. I have seen that with my own eyes. And so I know that that is possible. I have not necessarily seen people who were motivated entirely correctly, myself included. I try to be as far motivated towards God as I possibly can, but I am not divine in that way, right? We are all individualized divine pieces, none of us gods, but each of us a small piece of God. And so we can represent to a greater or lesser degree Him as a light. That is my intention. That is what I try to do. But it does not mean that I always succeed. It does not mean that anyone will always succeed. Most people fall in the middle of that scale somewheres. That is a polar opposite too, right? That good and evil are the same coin. It is the flip side of the same coin. So the balance is what you are meant to strike in all things. And that is true as well with good and evil. And so, back to the entities. There are actual entities out there, and some of them are aligned evilly. They are. Some of them are good. That is true, right? The angelic experiences, I do not discount entirely. The fact that some people are able to work with these entities to a productive means, My problem with that is that it is exceedingly hard to identify the difference between them, because one of the evil entities can deceive you. If you are not extremely diligent, you can be deceived by these entities. And if you allow them the ability to inhabit you, then they will take control of you. And that is a real thing, whether or not you believe it. The expulsion of demons was real. The alignment of the angelic realm with humanity is a real thing as well. So you can, through proper diligence, have access to these entities, and you can effectively use them in a positive manner. I don't. I have only recently began even experimenting with that, because it is something not to be trifled with, but it is absolutely not something to be dismissed. Again, we have seen the religious devotee who, without a knowledge of God or of universal law, has relinquished the ego to a certain extent, and opening himself to the universal mind, has become fanatical even to the loss of his individuality. Insane. The reasoning intelligence has taken such examples as a warning against opening this selfhood to the universal mind. That's what I was just talking about. Be very careful, right? Very careful. Just here, however, we meet a law of mind so well known as to have escaped critical inquiry, which is explained as in what follows. In the preceding chapter, we referred to the law of inspiration, that we draw in, inspire, whatever the mind is centered upon to the exclusion of all else, and that the wonderful formative principle dominating human consciousness at once makes an image, a thought form, and that which is then drawn. But in the process, the principle of discrimination is called into action, a principle which in vegetable life, being nearest the creative source and therefore purest in character, expresses itself most perfectly. When a seed is placed in the ground, the chemist, knowing the properties of the original plant, is able to predict with absolute certainty what chemical elements the growing seed will gather to itself, out of which to build a like organism. The same principle, finding expression in the human consciousness, is taken control of by the organized mentality and may be suspended in its action, directed in its course, or intensified in its operation, and thus, being under the control of the individual, produces manifold results. We just talked about that. Therefore, as soon as the individual, by means of the concentration previously noted, opens himself to the inflow of universal life, we shall see further on that life and mind are synonymous terms, that in which he believes flows in, and its images takes form in the mind and becomes, for the time, his consciousness. It has been demonstrated that a person believing in a certain deranged and consequently diseased condition of the body actually produces this condition. That is a real thing too. There have been instances in which the physical body has been destroyed by this means. Belief is an all-powerful factor in human life, and for this reason the necessity is imperative that the reasoning mind, or, if you please, the guiding intelligence, derived from experience, takes control of the activities of inner life and consciousness. When there exists correct knowledge of the workings of the intuitional faculties, and the individual is able to take control of this function, then it will be found that these higher faculties are the dominant faculties of the real self, that they are that part of man's nature which, even in the absence of conscious thought, knows that he exists and needs only an impulse of desire to call in from the universal mind unformed thought elements, right? That's coming, we just talked about this. These unformed thought elements, when carried to the reasoning brain, gives it to know, both by inductive and deductive methods, that which is beyond the ken of the mere reasoning mind or the mere instinctive action. From the foregoing, we may reasonably conclude that the higher faculties, now dormant in the race, may be brought into activity at will, and the consciousness allied to all that is in the universal mind, and that thus the individual may select therefrom whatever is needed. We think, therefore, it has been made clear that in the evolvement of the individual, by means of the inflow of qualities of universal mind, there are active three factors. First, the principle of inspiration, which draws in, causes to flow in the qualities of the universal life where all qualities exist. Second, the formative principle of human intelligence, so perfect in its workings that any quality that is indrawn is at once put into its proper form according to the specific quality. And third, belief, which underlies these two principles and controls the result of their activity, and determines the character or quality of the life inspired, and consequently decides what form it takes in the individual consciousness. Therefore, belief decides the character of the intuition. From what has been said, the thinking mind will find suggestions which answer the question as to why such monstrous errors, superstitions, and evil results of every kind have overtaken those who have depended exclusively upon the inner consciousness, the instinctive mentality. Because of the facts presented, the great religious teachers of the immediate past have emphasized the necessity of the reasoning mind, of the knowing. We read in Hosea 4:6, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge." And also the words of the Lord Christ, John 8:32, "Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." That's the banner on my YouTube channel. Free from those dangers that have beset the race from the beginning to the present time. But since belief, as we have seen, controls the inspiratory and formative principles of the individual life, we have reached a point in the growth of the race where mind, the reasoning mind, must discover certain general principles of absolute truth in order that the faculties of inspiration and intuition may be safely used, or, in the language of the ancient mystics, in order that the individual may go out into the realm of the universal mind, discover and obtain knowledge that the advancing needs of the people are beginning to demand. That's what I'm doing here. I am trying to teach that. I really am. That's where we're at. With this thought in mind, we shall endeavor in the following pages to expand our idea of human origin, of organized intelligence, of the fountains of life and the oneness of God, the cause of all. We shall suggest methods, also, by which we may gather the incorporate within us to a greater amount of the universal life, methods by which that life may be refined, sensitized, and intensified, thus giving it enormous added capacity, and methods that will give assurance to the correctness of the process from its beginning through each step of its course. And I genuinely hope that is true. I'm not entirely sure that Mr. Hiram here had the exact mechanics of it down. I feel like I do, right? That is why I'm here. I've had direct revelation on the things that I'm talking about. You don't have to believe that. But to me it is true, and to me I have used it. The process that I just outlined can be overlaid with this 6-pointed star, which is in reality 8 points of existence. 1, 3, and 8 is the number of manifestation for a reason. It is the oneness of God, it is the Trinity in action, and it is the 8 chakras by which you have access to the creation of life. To continue on our level of responsibility lesson from earlier, if you take the energy coming from the top and the bottom and you run them through the formative, right, that's what he's calling it, you take the crown and you pass it through the third eye, and then you amplify it through the intention of the third, which is the throat. It is the same at the bottom. You need to do both of these at the same time. I have likened it before to hooking jumper cables up, though. Like, the amplification happens, but the direct connection for the heart needs to be to the left-handed side. So you need to take the third eye and the sacral, or the third eye and the sacral, and connect them to your heart and project that intention out into your reality. The divine aura begins at the end of your palm, and you need to place that intentionality about halfway. You need to have the energy coming in from your divine aura and out from your heart and feeding that. You need to concentrate on that and ensure that you are following the 8 laws of creation. And that is how physical manifestation happens. That is how I directed the energy to remove the cyst in my throat. It is how I am healing various other parts of my body that I can't even talk about yet. Hopefully, I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult topic. I understand that I have some unconventional beliefs and that I have a tendency to step on toes whenever I am relaying the information that I know. And while it is not intentional to offend anyone, I do not apologize for it. If you are tied into the control systems, you will never be able to do this. Not in any effective way. You have been told, however, in all of the control systems that you can do it, and yet you still don't know that. Because the control system tells you, yeah, you can do it, and then they tell you, oh, but you might go to hell if you do it, so you feel guilty. You don't have to feel guilty. You will feel the effects, however, if you are misaligned. If you are not following the 8 laws of creation, you will receive returns that you did not intend to. That is a guarantee. I don't tell you that to restrict you. I tell you that to warn you. Take the time to make sure that your intentionality is absolutely correct before you do anything. If you are going to do any of the things that I talk about in any of my playlists, make sure to check yourself. I'm not here to check you. I'm here to give out information. I am casting enlightenment out like it is candy. I want everybody to have a piece. I honestly believe that if everybody on the planet was doing this, we would live in a utopia. And not the, utopia as a concept is actually hell, right? You're not meant to not work. That is not utopia. Utopia is that your work produces the correct actions and that you are justly rewarded for it. You are meant to work. You are meant to strive. You are meant to have hardships and to overcome them. That is part of your experience. That is why you are here. And you are not meant to skip any of that. Trying to manifest skipping any of that will intensify all of that. That is the consequences of your action. That is the law of returns in action. When they say that it will be returned to you times 3, that is a very real thing. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment if you agree or disagree. If it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. And if you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks, because I do not manifest money. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole and complete, just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt State. Peace.